Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. In this week's video, I want to show you something a little bit different. As you've seen in my previous videos, I typically look for high quality wood pieces of furniture. However, this time I wanted a challenge, so I picked up a cheap, low quality piece to transform into something modern and elegant.
I did a complete makeover, added a new base, covered the drawers in fabric, and added some modern hardware. Stay tuned until the end where I'll talk about how long these pieces took me and how much I put into it.
So, if you're looking for inspiration on how to transform your cheap pieces of furniture, then just keep watching because I'm going to show you exactly how I transform these. Before we jump into the video, I want to say a huge thank you to all my new subscribers, and with that said, let's jump into it.
I got started by wiping everything down with a multi-purpose cleaner. I removed the hardware and tossed it as I'm going to be replacing them, took the drawers out, and removed the rest of the hidden treasures.
So my plan with these drawers is to end up covering the drawer faces with fabric. But when I do that, I don't want there to be this little indent where the original hardware holes are. So I'm going to go and fill those right now.
I was changing the bases to give it a modern look. I started by removing the detailed legs, and I quickly found out this was not going to be easy and removed about 20 screws to get this base off. Whoever put this together did not want the bases coming off. I needed to remove the bottom panel to have access to the screws on the base. I carefully removed the panel since I was going to reuse it. I found that using a putty knife and a mallet worked best to pry off the old base. I used that same putty knife to score the edges and slowly wiggle it in using a mallet until I had enough leverage to pry off the base. I didn't want to rush this part and accidentally damage some of the dresser, so I tried to be very deliberate with each section I was prying off. While the nightstand and dresser were generally built the same, there were small differences between the two. Even though I was able to get to the screws without removing the panel, I was getting frustrated because nothing was coming apart like the nightstands. I decided to take a different approach on this dresser, and I started from the front piece, slowly working my way around. I measured the bottom of the dresser for the new bases I was building. These were all going to be painted over anyway, and I wanted to keep the cost low, so I picked up some primed pine board from Home Depot. I adjusted my miter saw to a 45-degree angle so that the pieces could join together seamlessly. I cut the front piece with opposite angles on either end and proceeded to cut 2 more pieces for either side. I repeated these steps to make the base for the nightstand. After cutting the pieces, I used them to measure the original base legs to see how much I needed to cut off and trimmed them using my jigsaw. I always like to use both wood glue and nails when working on furniture for the added durability. Here I'm using Titebond wood glue number 2 and finishing it off with my 18-gauge brad nailer using 2-inch nails. After putting the new base on the nightstand, this is what it looked like, and I was happy with how it was starting to look. I got started on the dresser doing exactly what I did to the nightstand by cutting the legs to size, applying glue, and nailing the new base on. After I got all the bases on, I stood it up to make sure everything was level and aligned properly. I like to use my fingers to apply the wood filler to the nail holes and grooves to really work it in. I like this one because it starts off pink and once it's dry it will turn tan.
So the next step's going to be sanding, and I'm painting this entire piece. So to prepare it for some primer, I'm going to go in with a 220 grit sandpaper all over the surface, just giving it a light sand to scuff the surface to give that primer something to adhere to.
I grabbed my sanding block and sandpaper with the same 220 grit to get in the detailed grooved areas. I used my orbital sander to sand the holes I filled on the drawer faces to get them ready to be covered in fabric.
After sanding the top surface, I see a lot more scratches and dents coming through. So I'm going to go in one more time with my wood filler, catch any of those spots, let that dry, and we'll sand it one more time.
After the wood filler was finished drying, I went back in with the 220 grit sandpaper to smooth everything over and get it ready for primer. There was a few detailed spots I had missed, so I went back in with my wood filler to fix any imperfections.
All right, it is time to make sure I have my bases in order before I go ahead and prime these pieces. I'm doing peg legs on these, so I need to build a structure that I can secure these on. I'm just using 2x4s, and I've cut 2 for either side. There's gonna be 4 legs, and I'm stacking them so I can get the desired height that I'd like. So I'm gonna glue and nail these in, and then secure the brackets so I can screw the legs in.
To cut the 2x4s, I laid them down on the bottom of the dresser to measure the desired length, and I cut them using my miter saw. I cut 4 identical pieces for the dresser and the nightstand. I used glue and 2-inch brad nails to fix the 2x4s to the base of the dresser. It was finally time for primer, and I decided to do it outside since the weather was so nice. I spread out my painting tarp and I moved both pieces outside. Before priming or applying any paint, it's important to remove any leftover dust from sanding so it doesn't dry in the paint. I found the quickest way to do this is to use my air compressor first to get off most of the dust before wiping it down.
There's one more thing that I'm going to do before I go ahead and prime these pieces. I'm going to caulk along this seam right here where the dresser meets the base that I made to close this gap, and it's going to give it a seamless look.
When caulking, my favorite thing to use is a wet wipe to run over the bead. I find that it gives me a perfect line every time. Before painting, I'm doing one coat of the Kills all-purpose primer using my Wagner spray gun. Next step is painting. I like to strain all of my paints to get out any of the large clumps and add a little bit of water to get a thinner consistency. Now that the primer has had some time to dry, I'm going in with a 220 grit sandpaper to give everything a quick sand before paint. For those of you who have been watching my channel for a while, you've seen I've been doing a lot of lighter pieces. However, this time I wanted to do something different, and once I started applying this darker color, I remembered how much I loved doing darker pieces. I let the first coat of paint dry for an hour, and then went in with a 220 grit sandpaper to smooth everything over. I then applied a second coat of paint to give everything an even finish.
I'm going to be doing something a little bit different and covering them in fabric. I have never done something like this before, and I feel like you don't see it that often on furniture pieces, but I thought it would add a little something fun to this piece. So I've tested one out already. It worked out super well. I just need to go ahead and trim these edges, but I went ahead, cut all of my other fabric pieces, and those are ready to be applied to all these drawers. To do that, I'm going to be using some Mod Podge and another fabric glue for the edges. So let's jump right in.
For the edges, I used a fabric glue for a stronger adhesion. I applied it to the edge and held down the fabric until it was glued. Once the glue was dry, I was using a pocket X-Acto knife to cut off any of the excess fabric.
For the corners of all the drawers, I'm going to use some small snipping scissors to go ahead and cut a seam right at the corner, cut off any excess material, and that way each edge will come together and meet and lay flat.
It was time to get the legs mounted. I purchased this tapered leg kit off of Amazon that came with a pre-threaded mounting bracket. Here, I'm measuring exactly where I want the legs and brackets to go before I begin drilling holes. Once I had all my holes templated, I used a 1/2 inch bit to drill about a 1/2 inch into the 2x4. The brackets were super easy to install, and once I got them secured, the legs screwed on very smoothly. If you guys are interested in the leg kit I used, it will be linked in the description. After I got all the legs mounted, I stood the dresser up, and if you can't tell by my facial expressions, I was getting so excited with how it was all coming together. My vision was coming to life, and it was time to complete the finishing steps. I chose a modern gold center pull for the drawers. I measured both sides of the drawer face to make sure the pulls were center, and I secured them using a 1/4 inch screw. It was finally time to get these drawers in and stage them for listing photos. Let's talk profit breakdown now. I purchased this set for $35 and put $85 into it, making the total amount in $120. I listed these for $475, leaving me with a total profit of $355. It took me 6 hours to complete these pieces, giving me an hourly rate of about $59. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video as much as I did. This one was definitely a learning experience for me, and I hope you all learned something as well. Comment down below what you'd like to see in future videos, and I'll catch y'all next week.